Ich gissedilit, il butna on so din. Haslokat storm an nufidi gat fulkalen fa. Aqkalle na storm with latin gotub nob nona filan la pasuchtsafs. Or Aqkalle, the Alkan language, another Sern-Cahilan language by me, Agma Schwa. Hey everybody, welcome to... Nah. Yeah, you're not getting my face this time. I've got like a perfectly positioned brutal pimple right on the very front and center of my forehead, and I'm just not doing it. I'm just not doing it today. Consider that my 13K subscriber anti-face reveal. Enjoy that. Maybe I'll put some little animatics of a little cartoon me doing little reactions and stuff. But you're not getting my face. Sorry. We got a big old Conlang showcase to go over today. Aqkalle is a very interesting language. I was originally considering not doing a showcase for this one because if you haven't noticed from the sample text, it uses the Prince alphabet, and I'll explain exactly why and how it works later, but pretty much all of my showcases before, with the partial exception of Shomatek, they all had different writing systems, but those pretty much are the primary writing systems of the dog world at the time period where the comic takes place. There are a couple other small ones. I'll talk about those later someday, but just know that any other writing systems that I introduce are either going to be from different time periods or are very minor languages in the world and like the lore. So this one, I debated doing it, but I actually need it for a section of the comic that's coming up. So I was like, okay, I gotta do this. We're making Alkan. We're making the Alkan language, or Aqkalle, as they call it. So without further ado, let's get into it, because there's a lot to talk about. It's a big slideshow. So Aqkalle, or Alkan, is a Cahilan language spoken in the northwestern and northern reaches of Minaicharan, with minority populations spread across much of the continent, even in small pockets of the Phonol Peninsula at the time of the Jojawa Joror comic. That's why I needed to make it. It features strange phonotactic elements descended from Phasfan, or Proto-Sern-Cahilan, which I made a video on, and Paramachican, which I've also made a video on, and has evolved in a Sprachbund with Pernth languages, including Pithom, which I've made a video on, for hundreds of years, leading to many loan words and grammatical borrowings. I had to make literally like multiple different dictionaries for this based on their etymologies. Its grammar also includes elements unique in its world. You'll see what I mean. So basically, we're going to be going over the classic elements of a Conlang showcase. This is how Alkan was spoken, or is spoken, in the time period of the comic, pretty much, as well as essentially for the 200-ish years prior to it. So we're going to go over all the elements of it, the phonology, the orthography, grammatical stuff, how it descends from Phasfan, and how it's influenced by Pithom in different ways. Let's do it. So first, as usual for my showcases about the Dog Days comic languages, the history. So, the group that would one day become the Alkans shares ancestry with the Proto-Parmachicans. The Proto-Parmachicans and Proto-Alkans split around 500 BR, BR being before the rediscovery of human technology, if you're new to this. As the Proto-Parmachicans migrated south, the Proto-Alkans headed west towards the ocean, the one that we would call the Pacific Ocean, if the maps and stuff that I'll be showing don't make that abundantly clear. So, a common Sprachbund existed in the region between the Proto-Parmachicans, Proto-Alkans, Proto-Clio, and the ancient Phonol for a long time, and linguistic divergence was pretty slow in the area until at least 500 AR after the rediscovery. During this period, they were known as the Junalk, or that's our English word for them, just go with it. Northern migration along the west coast followed for several generations as Junalk groups avoided the chaos of the human technology that was spreading around. By 1000 AR, they were some of the only Sern-Cahilan speakers in the northern reaches of the continent, surrounded by Pernth and northern Kernkla speaking groups. The group of Alkans furthest north settled in what we would call the coast of British Columbia and like the Alaskan Panhandle. Other groups remained further south and developed into different nations and cultures less affected by Perth linguistic influences. Beginning in the late 1200s AR, the sea-based Prince Empire conquered the coastal towns along pretty much the entirety of the west coast of Ŋimp, including the cultural capital of the Alkan Confederacy at the time, Aqkalle. And as one of the furthest Prince outposts, no attempts at intense colonization were ever made, preserving Alkan cultural power while also opening their civilization to new ideas from around the world, and the human technology as things started to settle. The prince continued to control Aqkalle, or as they called it in their language, Itopal, directly for 300 years, and indirectly into the 1980s. It lasted longer than much of the other prince colonies. The Alkan Confederacy, aligned with the prince and equipped with advanced human technology, gradually formed economic trade unions with the semi-nomadic groups across the plains and tundras of the northern reaches of the continent, eventually even reaching the Prince mainland. So essentially, the majority of what we would call Canada, except for Quebec, eventually gets subsumed into the overall Alkan Empire that would develop. So the Alkan monarchy assumed more authority over trade union provinces over time, enforcing law through a network of military forts and roads. And these were impressive roads, by the way. It's tough building roads in that area, and they managed to do it, and that's kind of how they clung to power. In the 1900s, faunal exploration of outposts on Cheese Island and other oceanic claims of the Alkans led to a bit of a rivalry, culminating in the official Alkan support for the Prince and Nashan invasion of the Faunal Peninsula in 2008, one of the several inciting incidents of the War of the Continent, which is a really big and chaotic war that shifts demographics and all kinds of the political chaos ensued. The War of the Continent is a big deal. I've mentioned it in previous videos. As you can see here on this map, the modern spoken range of the Alkan language is pretty widespread. It covers a massive swath of territory. The area that's light red is where there are like significant minority populations, or it's like a lingua franca in the area, so most people kind of know it or know a little bit of it so they can get by and thrive in the economy. The area is in dark red, which is mostly centered around British Columbia, the Alaskan Panhandle area, and various chunks going all the way along to the sea that was once known as the Great Lakes. That's where Alkan-speaking majority populations are in a 2050-ish, and that pretty much applies in 2067 when the comic takes place. Notice how the northern reaches of the Faunal Peninsula, all the way down south of like Baja California and all that, have areas with significant Alkan minorities. Let's get on to what the language should be called, why I call Aqkalle Alkan. So the English term Alkan is derived from the Arodjun word Jalkunk, which is an adjective meaning of or pertaining to the Alkan people. This comes from the name of the Cahilan culture inhabiting the northwestern reaches of Ŋimp, who around 500 to 1000 AR referred to their territory as Aqkalle, a term related to the Proto-Sern-Cahilan root "rovunga," which meant elder. This term evolved into the modern Alkan word Aqkallis. The name of the language used in this presentation is Aqkalle, which can be used as an irregular adjective or as an accusative case noun. And to be more formal, L'Aqkalle means the language of the Alkans in the absolutive case. And as usual, I have our descent from Proto-Sern-Cahilan table, where we compare a couple things. In this one, we're comparing Phosphon roots to Paramachican roots to Alkan roots. And honestly, there are not too many similarities. Yes, they did branch off from each other, but again, Phosphon was like 6,000 years before this, and Paramachican and Alkan, their ancestor, split up over 2,500 years before this, and the Alkans moved up into an area in a Sprachbund completely separate from where the Paramacheekans remained. So you can see there's barely any similarities here. The Phosphon root for tribe, udv, becomes the Paramacheekan root, urng, and in Alkan, it's just ah, which just means person, right? I'm not going to go through all of these. You can look at it yourself and pause. But things have evolved in a significantly different direction, the Alkan path. Yeah, before we get started, be warned, some of these glosses are kind of clunky. Some of the grammatical features in this are pretty hard to gloss the way that I usually strategize my glosses. Now, there are, as long as things make sense, there's technically no way to incorrectly gloss something, though there are standards that different linguistic institutions in our world use, and I generally go along with the ones that I was taught at university. But this one, it gets clunky, so kind of deal with it. I'm not in school anymore. You can't grade me on it. Feel free to comment gloss stinky in the comment section to increase my engagement. Yeah, so see how much I cry. Anyway, move on. Here's the phonology. As you can see, the plosives are not split up into a voiced and voiceless distinction. In fact, there is no voiced-voiceless distinction in the consonants in Alkan. It is a fortis-lenis distinction, an aspirated versus non-aspirated distinction. So what you'll see the letters B, D, and G used for are the classic IPA phonemes P, T, K, and that is distinguished from P, T, K, the aspirated consonants that typically begin English words with those phonemes. Those are phonemically contrasting from each other, and that difference shows up a whole lot. It's very important, and there are some allophonic things that happen to them that can often turn them into voiced consonants, but that's not the underlying phoneme, so you must deal with it. The other interesting thing here is that we have the glottal h and the pharyngeal h, but those are not typically used as independent consonants. They are typically appended to nuclei. They're codas. They follow and alter vowels most of the time, so that's what you're going to be seeing. The vowel system, of course, we have a, o, and e. So, yep, there's your phonotactics right there. You can look at that, admire it for its beauty. Pretty complex syllables are permitted in Alkan. A couple phonotactic constraints. So sometimes a root ends with h or h, or contains an illegal cluster, like a h or pharyngeal h in between two vowels. That doesn't happen in the realization of the language, but if you look at my dictionary document, you're going to see that in the roots quite a bit. Typically, an illegal cluster containing a vowel followed by h will have s appendicized into it. And then for the same situation, but with a pharyngeal h, or the q as it is romanized here, it will sporadically either be replaced with s or f. These are still included in the dictionary, in their incorrect forms, even though they aren't realized, because if the vowel that follows the H-colored syllable is said vowel will be elided in exchange for the infinitive verb ending na, right? So you have a root here as an example. We have matoha, right? That can't happen. That's the root. It is false. But as a noun, that root has been turned into matosa. And as a verb, it becomes mato. And that is important because if the root was mato, then the verb would look the same, but the noun would be matoso. So, very subtle difference, but it's a difference that matters. And a little bit of allophony. So, lots of things happen to a word like this one. It is ichn, right? But it's IQN. Vowels in pharyngealized nuclei often become diphthongs that tend to more open and back articulations. So becomes ih becomes and becomes becomes right? And then pharyngalized syllables, which end in nasals, often force said nasal to become syllabic. And then a pharyngalized nucleus in front of a syllabic consonant or a geminated consonant often fronts from h to h, and linguistically is considered the onset to the syllabic nasal. So thus, you go from what should have been something along the lines of to with a very slight but syllabic nasal. A little bit more on allophony. A word like this one, bahn, also goes through a lot. You'd think, just by looking at it, that it would become something along the lines of bahn, but it becomes ban, or something similar to that. Na is often dentalized at the end of words. Ha often disappears and lengthens the preceding vowel when the syllable's coda is a nasal or a liquid. And lengthened vowels, which only happen in these particular situations, lengthened vowels are often fronted. So becomes something more like o becomes just stays and becomes I. Onto the stress patterns. They're relatively regular. Verbs stress the final syllable without schwa as a nucleus. As nouns, give stress to the first pharyngalized or glottalized nucleus, otherwise the first nucleus before a geminated consonant, and otherwise the first syllable without schwa as a nucleus. And for adjectives, it's the same as nouns, and adverbs is the same as nouns, but the adverbial prefix the can't carry primary stress. Process that how you will. Now the writing system. Very nice. So the writing system for modern Alkan is based on the Prince alphabet, with some letters imported from the Paramachican alphabet where needed. It doesn't actually happen that often. Where the Prince marked R-colored vowels, the Alkans use the same diacritics to mark Q-coda syllables and H-coda syllables. Here is the Prince Alkan alphabet. It was introduced after the Prince conquest of Aqkalle and in the 1200s, unsurprisingly, and it gradually displaced a modified Pitham-style script mixed with ancient Paramachican varieties. The only big intricacy here is that the alphabet does not compensate for word initial EQ semivowels, the oh, and this is written instead with the double H letter. There's not too much crazy stuff going on here. The numbers are interesting, and we're going to talk about the numbers later, but for now you can see that they are technically base 10, but with a sub-base of 4 and with octal symbols for larger numbers. Now, for the romanization, the only real spelling intricacies are that schwa, the neutral vowel, is really considered the neutral vowel by the Alkans. It stays as a letter E whenever it's either at the beginning of the word or the end of the word, but pretty much everywhere else, except for a couple really rare situations, is just written with an apostrophe. And so the morphology, we're going to get onto that, but pretty much you're going to see some morphemic word initial gemination for plurals, some wacky conjugations and declinations and stuff like that. Well, you'll see. The word order is generally this. It's OSV, but more specifically, an indirect object is typically before or even appended to or prefixing to the direct object, and the subject is typically either directly before or, if it's a pronoun, literally connected and conjugated into the primary verb. It does pro-drop quite a bit. So, the cases, you got nominative, accusative, absolutive, genitive, place name accusative, and tool accusative. And again, so the place name and tool accusatives are literally used exactly the same as the normal accusative. It's just different endings, descended from phosphon endings and Paramachican endings that are, for place names or for tools. The speakers understand it. You should too. Accept it. Anyway, there are declensions for every vowel and for consonants in general. They are just named after each of those vowels, and Q, H, N, and M in the coda position of a syllable do not count for the consonant declension. Instead, the final vowel in the root takes the precedent for those situations. Now for making nouns plural, it's pretty fun. The first consonant of the root is geminated or otherwise altered according to this table on the left. Right, so for example, you have the word for a rock. It is fugatse, which becomes fugatse, rocks. Then you have loto, which is valley, and loto for valleys. It's pretty fun. You can look at it, right? You can see the BP, the DT, and the GK in there. Yeah, have fun with that. And on to the pronouns. I know this slide looks brutal, but the whole big orange thing on the right is the Fasvan pronouns, right? In the nominative case specifically. Here you can see a very large table with a whole lot of empty spaces. Those empty spaces are there because I literally wanted to show how the Fasvan pronouns gradually simplified and merged together over time to lead to the modern list of Alkan pronouns. So all those empty spaces are ones that had that had pronouns of their own in the proto language but no longer do, and all the ones that do still exist are directly descended from Proto-Paramachican and eventually from Fasvan, Proto-Sern-Cahilan. Right, and here they are in the accusative, and accusative ones are found as independent words, unlike the nominative and absolutive ones, which you'll see what I mean by that later. I'm not going to talk about it too much. And there's the absolutive ones, which again, there's a lot to talk about for that, and the genitive, also independent words. For dative case, you use these prefixes, and these prefixes are either used as pronouns and directly appended onto a direct object, or they are prefixed onto a noun with no case marking applied to it, and no case marking means accusative, so it's just accusative but with these dative prefixes on them depending on the agency of the clause. I do a little trolling, yes. So there are 3 special pronouns in the absolutive case, and they are suffixes as opposed to all the other ones being either prefixes or independent words. They are mal, ul, and tam. And these pronouns are the last remains of the dative pockle number found in Fasvan and present in Proto-Paramachican before Paramachican and Alkan split off. It basically, the logic and the reason I named the slide this is because it was derived from the pockle number. So if hypothetically, for the sake of argument, if you had the word trolls in a pockle number, you could say a few trolls, that gradually grammaticized into a little trolling, like a little bit of the act of trolling, which then in casual speak in Proto-Paramachican became I do a little trolling, and then merged from there into just becoming the default first person I troll, indicative present tense, just like that. And you can see the exact path of that happening in these roots below. For the verb I stretch or tighten, it originated from the Proto-Sern-Cahilan word for a few hides and gradually transformed into an actual grammatical clause. Now things are about to get a little bit more complicated. So we're starting it off a little bit simple here. Transitivity. Transitive clauses feature the nominative and the accusative case in OSV order. Transitive verbs are conjugated according to whether the verb is strong or weak and the person of the subject. We'll talk about the strong and weak in a second. So for example, if you wanted to say I hunt for rocks, you're using the accusative for rocks and the nominative first person singular prefix and verb conjugation. So you get fukaduhon, And then intransitive clauses feature the absolutive case and its verb in absolutive and verb order, right? In the absolutive case, person can either be marked as a prefix or as a suffix, as discussed on the previous page. So in this particular situation, it's another one of those suffixes. So I hunt, in general, is hunt with the absolutive first person singular suffix, and that is honul. Now, the strong and weak verbs, where things get brutal. Several common verbs are strong verbs, featuring the conjugation pattern displayed at the table to the right. Now, this system is a direct descendant of the Phasfon strong verb system. Many other root words that end with ma and na, and sometimes other consonants, have been hyper-corrected into strong verbs over the years, even though they don't descend from Phasfon strong words. They may just be commonly used verbs, or verbs with very short roots that just get turned into strong verbs, even though they weren't meant to be. So there is the root hunt, which means to hunt, and I swear it is 100% a coincidence that happened, right? All of these languages are done through so many steps of evolution from Proto-Sern-Cahilan and the other stages of proto-language and leading to them. And in this particular situation, the word for hunt ended up being hunt. Don't judge me. It's a happy little coincidence. It's a certified Bob Ross moment. And here's the weak verbs. So they follow this conjugation pattern. The typical rule is that if the root word ends in a vowel, then the verb will probably be a weak verb. This isn't always true. Again, there are hypercorrections. There are common verbs that are strong but have roots ending in vowels, and there are formerly weak verbs that have been hypercorrected into strong verbs simply because the root ends with a nasal. So you have takon, which is the verb for to link, to join, or to follow somebody. However, it gets much worse because there are active and stative verbs as well. So if you don't really know what active and stative verbs are, this isn't even a perfect example, because the way I'm using the terms active and stative verb has a much broader meaning than what it means in English. But in Alkan, this is how active and stative verbs work, and it makes things really painful. So let's say you have an active sentence. Jeff reads, he reads a book or something. And that means it's an action that has a start and an end. It is a conscious action by an agent doing a thing that can start and end. Meanwhile, stative would be the text reads blankety blankety blank. It's a statement about the nature of something that requires no change. It's the same verb, reads, but one has an active connotation and one has a stative connotation. In Alkan, those literally change the conjugations of the verbs and a few other grammatical elements. So let's take a little example couple of sentences right here. So the root word for I is abab, the root for thing is slo, and the root for see is abad. The active sentence, eyes spot things, I see things, using the verb to see, is Ukhbab flaband slomo. And the stative, eyes sense things, eyes see things, is Ukhbab aband slomo. So you have fla as a prefix in one, and you have as a prefix in the other. So how does this happen? Well, it's kind of annoying. Let's take that root abad, which can mean sight. So I've got this split up into a couple steps to hopefully make it a little bit more sensible. Active in the first row and stative in the second row, right? So you have the strong verb, aband, which means to see, right? And then if we have the subject, the agent in this sentence, be a nominative third person plural inanimate, it becomes flaband in the active. It has prefixed with a phosphon nominative third person inanimate pronoun. Meanwhile, nothing happens in the stative version. There is no prefix pronoun because if you think back to the table a couple slides ago, maybe I'll put up a screenshot of it. The third person conjugation for a strong verb is the same as the infinitive. So the result, you get flapant, they spot, or apant, they sense. Then the other example, you have a weak verb. You have this root kno, which means to topple or knock over. So the active version, right? Again, the default verb, the infinitive form is knon. And then you have the subject in this case being an absolutive second person singular. In the active situation, you use the phosphon pronoun table to slap gim on the front of it, and it becomes gimknon. But in the stative version, you take the conjugation from the table, but you don't slap any pronoun on it. So it is just knon. And thus the results are the active version, gimknon, meaning you collapse, and the stative version, bknon, meaning you are a pushover. Commands are adopted pretty much wholesale from the way commands work in most Perth languages, including Python, if you didn't know this. Commands cause the vowels to vanish from a root word, or particularly a root verb in this situation. So basically, the vowels just kind of become fricatives that match sonically with the nearest consonants. So if you have a second person command, if you wanted to tell someone, come on, let's go, you'd say, ptkin. Alright, now on to tense marking, which is a little bit more complicated than the way that it works in Permachican. So past tense is marked using a particle descended from the late Junalk word fagar, which means to complete or fill, which is a cognate with and shares an etymological origin with the Permachican word thuyungun, the perfective modal verb. This particle is fal. So, for example, you have the sentence, I ran home, and that takes this verb particle, fal, and slaps it between the accusative noun and the conjugated verb. So, I ran home is koch ufal pakan. Notice that the verb, which in its infinitive form is pakant, is a strong verb. In the present tense, this sentence would be koche upakan, using the active verb paradigm, of course, because running is an active action that had an end result of going home. The particle, fal, steals the nominative first-person prefix clitic, while the main verb, pakan, is still conjugated for the first-person subject as pakan. Therefore, you get ufal pakan, and not like upakan. That would have been incorrect. If this clause was spoken using the stative verb paradigm, however, which in Alkan carries the same meaning as to measure in this case, run and measure, active versus stative, the past tense sentence would be koche fal pakan, and would roughly translate to I am as long as my home. Yeah, and you can see literally the only difference in this situation is the u. If it's ufal pakan, it's like I ran home. If it was stative and was just fal pakan, that it is I am as long as my home. Important distinctions here. Future tense is marked using the particle fa, another direct cognate with the Permachican future tense marking prefix fu in this case. And eventually, through Proto-Sern-Cahilan, it's a cognate with Arodjun's future subject pro words, like wa, we, wo, etc. But they don't know that. Like, that is like a very much a linguistic stretch. The experts in that world do not know that. Fa is used as an adverb in modern Alkan, typically immediately following its verb. In a way, it kind of means futurely, or in the future. So, the sentence, you will learn, is just the absolutive second person singular slapped onto the verb learn with will. You know, the future marking adverb thing stacked at the end of it. So, fa. So what is the default tense then? The default tense, when you see a conjugated verb, is some form of present. Which one it is depends on whether the verb is active or stative. Active verbs carry the implication that an action is one with a concrete beginning and or end. Thus, an active present verb is generally one that is indicative, declaring a concrete event. Meanwhile, stative verbs imply something that continues to do its job independently of observation. You could call this habitual, imperfective, etc. The same logic applies to the past and future, just using fa and fa. So sometimes, such as with a first person on a strong verb, the active and stative voice sound and are spelled exactly the same, and you might need another adverb or something to clarify that you're talking about right now or in general. So copulas and perfective forms, right? The copula verbs to the left are directly inherited from Pithom and entered the language around the 1400s AR, replacing the High North Alk verb makakona, which means to appear, the cognate to the Paramachican verb mangun, to be, which mangun is the typical copular verb in Paramachican. Now, that is not the case here. These copular verbs are treated as weak verbs. A copular verb preceded by a verb with the suffix afs creates a perfective verb. This lovely phrase, kalasumsapin, it translates roughly to I appear to be stabbed. Adjectival copulas, for example, something like the crab is cute, you will conjugate a copular verb and inflect the focal noun using the absolutive case. For equational and nominal copulas, for example, like the tree is a fir, you'll inflect both nouns using the absolutive case, creating a bit of a middle voice, and you'll conjugate the verb as such too. Copulas are always considered stative verbs unless they are used to form perfective verb phrases. Lovely, lovely perfective form phrases, which there are many ways to create with slight subtle differences, similar to how English has wacky things like that. The perfective form can express a few different vibes relating to the agency involved with the verb. So, with that first example, I appear to be stabbed, you would have kalasumspin. So the strong verb conjugation, but the prefix goes to the copula. And by that I mean the strong verb conjugation on the verb to stab, not on the copula. Copulas always get weak verb conjugation. Anyway, option 2, you have I appear to have stabbed. A little more agency there. Karasumpafspin. So no verb conjugation at all, and the prefix goes to the copula. Third option, I appeared to have stabbed myself, would become okarasumpafsapin. No verb conjugation, the prefix goes onto the copula. It uses an accusative pronoun, independent, that comes like before the perfective phrase. And then, it is me who appears to be stabbed, okarasumpspin, which has the strong verb conjugation, no prefix on the copula, and an optional accusative pronoun. So lots of fun shenanigans that you can do here by slightly differently conjugating your perfective forms, which are used very often in the language, by the way. Like the direct translations to English are super formal. Sounds like a freaking anime subtitle. For the past and future perfective forms, you do pretty much the same thing, but you apply the fa and fa as needed. The whole sentence becomes ungrammatical or changes its meaning if the perfective verb, the tense particle, or the copular verb are misplaced or misconjugated, so be careful. And on to the conditional mood. So a contraction of the equivalent of assuming to so that creates a particle that begins a clause expressing a conditional mood. It's not too hard, but I just wanted to show the evolution from that large phrase into the simple little word that is used now. It goes from essentially meaning assuming it is so that, or Tom poso elakun kandafstin, to poslakun, which is kind of like be it so that, which is also grammatically correct. If you want to be a little more formal, you can say that. And down to pislan, which means if blank. So the sentence pislan kim slosa slon would mean if you go, I go. Prepositions. There are 3 accusative noun suffixes: accusative, place name accusative, and tool accusative. right? Talked about. This leaves room for several prepositions, all of which operate in their typical fashion by immediately preceding noun phrases. This means that prepositions often begin sentences. So for example, the sentence, I travel with nukamuk. So nukamuk, go home. Articles, and these articles share an origin with and evolved alongside the Paramachican articles. So they're essentially a simplified, caseless version of the Paramachican articles. In modern Alkan, the equivalents of the Paramachican objective case are the ones that survive. In Paramachican, it's le, me, and o, but in this situation, the indefinite is lo, the proximate definite is mu, and the distal is lon, and it changes when the following noun begins with a vowel. They are only used when context requires the use of definiteness. The default is still to not have an article, but they are often used. That's something that's pretty common in all the Sern-Cahilan languages. It's essentially the default of not having an article, but using the article for emphasis. The sentence, we went home, would be kachful falslon. But the sentence, that house is ugly, like you're specifying that particular house, you would say long kachsa pinsin kalbe, right? And again, I know right there, kachsa, which means house in the freaking absolutive case. I know it looks like Spanish casa, but that's yet another happy coincidence. Bob Rossen right over that. Anyway. Adjectives, they are conjugated, pretty much a simplified version of the way Pitham conjugates. There are 3 intensities for the adjective that determine how they can be conjugated. Intensity 1 is the equivalent of saying, like, very, you're adding emphasis to it. It is extremely the way that it is when you are adjectivalizing a root. Meanwhile, intensity 0 is kind of like the normal one. You're not describing the intensity of it in any way. You're just saying, like, oh, it's a blue house. And intensity -1 is negated. So if you're saying, like, oh, it's the house that's not blue, you would just say it is the not blue house. You'll see lots of adjectives in the example sentence. Example 1, you have this beautiful sentence, the ugly insect hides at the edge of the pond. Ugly, we are giving it an intensity of 1. So really, it's like the really ugly insect hides at the edge of the pond. And in the second example, we have, my friend's cute crab is funny. Cute is given an intensity of 0. So we're not saying it's very cute, we're not saying it's not cute, but funny is intensity 1. So it's really, my friend's cute crab is really funny. And that sentence would be, oh yeah, and speaking of negation, so we talked about the adjective negation. It's like saying un or not in front of an adjective, but no, we need the other ways of negating something. And the way to negate a verb is simply a, and this is inherited directly from Pitham and other Perth languages where the negation particle is just a. This word replaced the ancient Cahilan negation word, which is just k, which evolved into the Paramachican. And Alkan negation works the same way as in Paramachican too, but it abandoned this cumbersome particle in favor of just by 1000 AR. Looks like that before consonants, and it's al before vowels. So if you wanted to say don't go, again, remember, vowels get elided and turned into just fricatives based on the prior consonant. So don't go would be asl. The way it works is exactly akin to the way the Paramachican went. However, negatives before different parts of speech can counteract with each other. So if you wanted to say it is not ugly, then you're just saying, like, it's really not ugly. But if you wanted to say that isn't not ugly, then that does negate it. And then on to some multi-clause sentences and how to create irrealis mood. So splitting clauses is typically done with the words dom and ichen, as we talked about earlier, ichen, Right, so dom is usually considered the noun phrase that begins a subordinate clause and can frequently act as the direct object of a sentence. So, for example, if you wanted to say something along the lines of, I suggest that you close the door, the dom is kind of like the that in that situation, but it is a noun that begins an entire subordinate clause. So it turns into dom, muom, biton, ukik. Now notice the verbs are right next to each other in this situation, and that happens a lot in these basic subordinate, like compound sentences. And then ichen is used to begin a subordinate clause nested within a nominative, accusative, or absolutive phrase. For example, if you wanted to say, I did this in order to help you, it's kind of like para in Spanish. You would use ichen in this situation. It becomes ichen linpan ufalmim. And again, right there, you have the two verbs right next to each other. And then absolute phrases, just when you thought we weren't going deep enough. I told you this is a big presentation. Using partial perfectives. Yes, an absolutive phrase is something along the lines of being approved by the committee, or just approved by the committee. The plan has moved forward. The bolded section right there, that's an absolutive phrase, and it happens a lot in Alkan. So remember back to those perfective verbs and their various forms. If you take the fourth perfective verb form, it is me who appears to be stabbed, or Aqkalle. Take that, and we're going to make a new phrase using the simplest form of this paradigm. It kind of directly translates to this cursed sentence. It is it that is approved. As in, it is the thing in question that is approved. Or la pasotsaf's pin. And to turn this into an absolute, all you gotta do is remove the copula. So la pasotsaf's literally translates to itself approved. It's ungrammatical on its own, but it has to be preceded by at least one associated noun phrase and then contain an entire sentence that happens after it, because it's an absolute phrase, right? So, approved by the committee, the plan has moved forward, would be, right? That sentence is grammatical. And asking questions, very important stuff. It derives from, yet again, pithum. We have the Pernth rules for asking questions, used pretty much one for one with some variation. Like the pithum root da, which means just like a variable or an uncertainty or just x. The loaned cognate til is the root for anything unknown. It acts as a blank space in a sentence that implies the desire for an answer to fill in the blank. So the noun tilse means an unknown thing, or essentially what. The verb tiln means to do an unknown action. What, but as a verb. The adjective ditilna means in an unknown way, or how. And then you pair these with words like fixe, which means rationale, or taslolsa, which means at a point in time, or achsa, which means person. You can create the paradigms for why, when, and who, respectively. At what time will you begin? And these slang shortenings are used like pretty often, especially when they're used in intransitive clauses. And yes, I told you to get back to the numbers. They are technically decimal. I know, hold your booze. With some influence from Pernth groups which used octal. Yay, applause. As with all Cahilan groups, in ancient times they used dozenal. In the 1000s AR, the Junalk people were exposed to octal numbers in trade with the Pernth peoples. However, when the Prince Empire arrived, their decimal system became vital for the trade with the outside world via the sea. And as the monarchy of Alka became more powerful and trade inland became more valuable and lucrative, decimal numerals with special symbols and units of measure to accommodate for octal users of the interior became standard. Interestingly, the Prince numeral system evolved into decimal from a dozenal octal hybrid system long ago, like thousands of years ago. You can see the sub-base of 4 still present in the numbers 1 through 8 of the Prince numerals. The octal symbols for counting bulk numbers are taken from the Python numeral system pretty much directly. These numbers are based on the Dryas octopetala, an 8-petaled flower that grows in Arctic and subarctic climates. And yes, if you are a fan of like paleoarchaeology, that Dryas is the same flower whose pollen is used to determine the younger and elder Dryas periods in global climactic history. Anyway, pressed or amber-sealed Dryas flowers are considered precious and are represented in money iconography throughout the northern reaches of Minangkabau. So that's pretty much it for the language itself. Now we are on to the sample text, as usual. Now, the following text is a short conversation between two Sardiki Alkan settlers in the Phaunal Peninsula, discussing their distaste for the R coloring and L coloring of vowels in the Prince language, circa 2020 AR. These people would be hearing a lot of Prince speech in the northern reaches of the peninsula, where the town of Sotervau, the historical capital of the Prince colony effort in the Phaunal Peninsula 700 years prior, was experiencing an influx of new Prince settlers. So it's basically just two Alkan pups roasting the Prince language. Have fun. Leses datum o plenesel pon dipbebene. Domal imenul denul ka dil ficha wilanun. Lukkak me dich ma pinse. Ich in dil fichechin le das och slön pisin de be. Kmat faftinse. Gesot verfleich in lidnas den slas of flaf motze. Til bebef min. Hasad na plenesel ma bech ben. La lulna onzo. Ke de mu falla bachen. De ben beslan sugat na neb zum bafna. Masadana. Mon fmeng sugat diska. Business se plukten sig eklutsustintam. Domutum ha lilona la pinta la null. Alola non tat. Lumasa matul plenese bifmise kin ston dintam. Monalo slend. Aile menul ke mo afmako lona la tintip. Su biftam mo afe mikmafs fmiddledina. Don dit mal. And that's the end. Yes, thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you didn't. I hope you really enjoyed that 13K subscriber face anti-reveal. My face will be back next time because the next video I'm putting on this channel is the Cursed Conlang Circus 2, baby! Yes, that's right. I'm gonna be holding myself up in the editing shadow realm until what may have to be split up into 2 videos, but I'm gonna try my frickin' best to make it fit into YouTube's video length requirements. Yes, that's how long it's going to be. Either set aside your day or get ready to have me playing in the background for literally an entire day. Enjoy that. Yes, it's coming soon. It is coming soon. I will be working on it probably as you watch this particular video premiere. So special thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/nga and my channel members. Yup, channel memberships is a thing that exists. I announced it in the previous video, and during said announcement, 2 people became channel members. So thank you to Mocha and some guy who likes Sega and long usernames. I can prove one of those things, but I can't prove the other right here. But thank you to you two for joining the member group, and to Everett Paul, who became a member while I was editing this video. Ooh, oh, thanks Everett. Oh, total stranger. Anyway, oh yeah, and Crash, who became a matron on Patreon, also while I was editing this video. You cool person, you. Thank you. Yes, if you become a patron, you get to choose the memes that go in the green screen behind me, except for in this video, because again, anti-face reveal. And you get to be in a secret Discord chat, you get to see the pages of the comic release early, along with like the gloss translation of the comic as it goes along, and a bunch of other behind the scenes stuff, and you know, video suggestions. You get to put a segment at the end of a video, and in this particular case, my matron, longtime matron, and one of the administrators, one of the oligarchs of the Agma Schwa Discord server, Dylan Hartwig, has a segment of one of his languages that he would like to showcase, which I'm going to put right here. Until next time, and by next time I mean at the second cursed Conlang circus, Nga is out. Subscribe to get me to re-face reveal at the cursed Conlang circus, or I'll just be a disembodied, maybe cartoon or something again. Bye.